My name's Debbie Thiel, and I was at the company from 1995 to 2024. The majority of my time at Microsoft was in product management, but I also had a few multidisciplinary roles, but primarily always on the product making side, working with engineering across both consumer and enterprise products. I'm on the hometown team here, so I grew up in Bellevue, Washington. Spent most of my life living in Washington State with a few years in Alaska. And so really born and raised in the Pacific Northwest and Seattle area. And then I chose to go to university at the University of Washington. And then it was between my junior and senior year that I first started working at Microsoft. I am the youngest of four kids. Probably an interesting fact about our family, I'm the third sibling to work at Microsoft. So my brother was the first one there, and then my sister Kim was there for a while. I was, as the youngest of the four kids, I was the last one to start there, but I also lasted the longest. I had a really fortunate upbringing. My dad was a civil engineer. My mom was a longtime school teacher. I have a lot to be thankful for in my life. It was during my junior and senior year, I had been doing a study abroad in Germany, and it was a rare summer that I came home and I actually did not have a job lined up because I was always working through school. Had a job since I was probably 10 years old. And so I came home that summer from Germany, and my brother said, well, hey, we need people helping out on the Windows 95 launch. It's probably the biggest marketing spend that Microsoft had had on a product launch at the time. And they needed someone to work on a customer testimonials book for the launch product. So my first job at Microsoft was reaching out to a bunch of customers that had been in what we called a beta program. So they had been testing our Windows 95 product to help get it ready for release and give us feedback. And then we took their reactions, their stories, their personal experiences with how the product worked for them, how it kind of changed their life, the things they were excited that it could do differently. And we compiled that all into a book, and we put that on every press reviewer's chair. So that product book really stuck with me, but that was my first job at Microsoft. And it was honestly a bit of a happy accident that I ended up working on that product. And after kind of meeting the team and getting entrenched with the team on that product, I just kept doing more and more, and they were happy to have me. And so when came time to graduate, they said, hey, you're pretty useful in this team. Would you like to stick around? And I said, absolutely, let's do it. So that was kind of my happy accident on how I came to Microsoft. My first role when I started at Microsoft was technically as a producer. That was my title. And a lot of what I was doing at that time was helping take our marketing materials, marketing content, and put it on websites that was all part of Microsoft.com, which kind of led me into, hey, there's a lot of processes we could improve on how we're publishing our marketing messages on the internet. And at that time, people said, hey, it sounds like you're kind of into fixing the underlying structure. Let's start mapping you more into a program management type job where you're working more with engineers on how we get things done as well as what we get done. And that sort of led me from producer into program management, where I effectively was for most of my career, with then some title transitions into product management over time. Program management at Microsoft was kind of a unique role in industry. And I was fortunate in my time when I worked for a team that was looking at what training we provide to Microsoft engineering roles. We got to do this super cool project where we went back in time and looked at, hey, who was the first program manager at Microsoft and why did that even come to exist? And we learned from that time that program management was born out of helping engineers scale So it was go do the thing, collect the data, find out the perspective that we need to build the product that the engineers don't have time to do. So the first person in that role, was really leading on looking at what competitors were doing, looking at what was good or bad about alternatives in the market, talking to customers, figuring out what they needed us to do or what they wanted to do that we couldn't do for them yet. So that at its essence, program management became about sort of doing the thing we maybe didn't know how to describe, but that was necessary to build product as software and technology and the processes we use to ship it and create it were changing. It was a lot of that diversity of it's kind of the do whatever it takes that the team needs you to figure out and learn that helps get the product into customer hands. It just was this ever-changing, wonderful challenge that is part of what really drew me and I think ultimately kept me going on it for 30 years. My favorite part of working on Windows, I would say, is understanding and just getting a feel for the reach and the impact that Windows had at a broad scale. You find that it's powering so many things you just could never imagine. Like any industry, anything that you could think of, you were interacting with in the world that was driven by software. Windows was somewhere in that stack. And so I think the big thing that I took away from it was just the depth and importance on every decision you made, every little thing you made better, faster. It was going to impact millions of people, sometimes hundreds of millions of people. Now we say billions of people. So, what an opportunity to do that. And I think one of the stories I remember from that time, I was working on software distribution. So I used to commonly say, this is the annoying thing that pops up in the corner of your screen and tells you, hey, Windows needs to update. And we had a lot of sophisticated logic to figure out what updates do we put on your machine in what order, and how do we make sure that the right sort of dependency stack is there so we don't do something inadvertently that breaks your applications. And when we were going through that process, I was having a heated argument one day with a couple engineers, and people were really sort of tense. And I said to people, "Hey, let's all calm down. Like, we're not solving cancer here. We're not curing cancer." And the engineers looked at me and they said, "Debbie, do you know how many hospitals we're running in right now? We are curing cancer. This does matter." And it was just like, oh yeah, okay, right. Thank you. Like, take me back down to the foundation of how important the decisions are that we make and just how seriously we should take the decisions that we make. Engineering excellence was an interesting team in that we had people from each of the engineering roles. So we took sort of a, hey, who is the expert in or who is on point for content publishing, for globalization, for program management, for at that time quality engineering or testing, software development. And so each of the disciplines that we had that were part of a Microsoft engineering team definition, because it took more than just someone with a software engineer title. We had people with all those other specialties that were definitely core to the software delivery process, innovation and delivery process. So our job was to look after all of those disciplines and help define, hey, does Microsoft need more or less of them? Where are the skills emerging that people need training on? They need resources, they need guidance, they need materials, maybe new team practices. So we did both that combination of title or discipline specific things. So my job was in one part let's bring together a leadership team of directors of program and then product management across the company, bring together these leaders in program management, help them come to a point of view on what does the company need. And I was kind of in the middle of that as a facilitator. So help get the best thinking out of this group of program management leaders at the company, and then start to institute that into training that we could scale to the thousands of program managers we had enroll in the company. So it was a very cool job. I felt so lucky to get to do it. I learned so much from other program management leaders. And for me personally, it was a chance to push facilitation skills that I never really knew would be so important to the job process. Learning and the skills people needed to do their jobs well was changing so quickly that the more we could iterate on and be agile with curriculum, the better we were helping serve the population of engineers at the company. So that was a huge part of the process, was thinking about how are we going to make these new practices and these new processes stick, as well as just what are we trying to teach people. I was in Microsoft Office from 2016 until I decided to close my career with Microsoft in 2024. It was an interesting time and probably informed most by the role that I even came to do, or the job that I had when I joined Office. So my job was a bit unique. I was an individual contributor, so I came out of being a leader to being party of one. And my job at the time was, hey, we have all these different ways of doing common tasks for the customer, the end user, inside our suite of Office products. And if we need to succeed in making this one thing or one experience or one service that is Microsoft 365, we have to simplify this down. There's too many ways to do the same thing that shouldn't be different. These are arbitrary differences that we impose a tax on users that makes it hard to use our software. So my job was to figure out how to pick some focus areas and actually see them through. So I was lucky to partner with an amazing user researcher. We came up with some sort of standard things that people need to do in all of the M365 products. So we thought about things like sign in. We thought about things like your personal account card or your profile card, search, things where there really only needed to be one way or one interaction pattern to doing something. And then we took those things and we said, okay, what's the inventory of all the different ways that teams have implemented this thing today? And how do we get that down to just fewer? So these things are more repeatable for customers. So we called it the coherence program. It was broader than Office for certain. Even at some point, the product managers in Xbox came knocking on my door and they said, we have the same problem in Xbox. How do we go solve for this? So that was my first job. And it was just a lot of how do we reduce the number of unique concepts that we put in front of customers that don't need to be there. I can say the growth was, we were working equally to unblock what we thought were the adoption challenges in each of those channels and think about how do we reach people through these new channels to help them find what is M365, but also know what's inside of it, because the hero brands that people associated with Office were not as evident when the thing you were selling to them was Microsoft 365. A key challenge that we had that was inhibiting our growth was, what's even in this? Is this Office? I'm unclear. So that was definitely a growth inhibitor that we were facing. That was part of why we needed to go after this whole coherence challenge. There were many dimensions, I would say, to what it meant as a leader to be leading your team through COVID, through the pandemic. You had to deal with all the things and then more, from what are my customers experiencing? What are they asking for? One of the unique stories that stood out in office that I'm sure anyone that was there in 2020 will never forget was how we worked with Pfizer at the time. So they were busy working on vaccines. They use Office for all of their FDA approvals, for documentation, and they were, working day and night, gangbusters, as fast as they could to bring these vaccines to market and share all the test data, the learning, the knowledge as part of going through that approval process. And so they had a bunch of demands, especially on our Word team. So, Word went through a really deep dive with them on commenting. Commenting was very specifically a feature we were iterating on at the time. It had bugs, it had opportunities to improve the user experience around it. It needed to sync and respond better across the different platforms. And many people across Office, especially the Word team, deep dived with customers and said, okay, how are we going to get this done? And it was all parts of the stack, from how does the experience in the Word app need to change all the way to how that impacted the services. And it was an intense, but also a great feeling of contribution. Going back to that story I mentioned in the beginning, where with Windows, Windows powered so many things in the world. It was such a responsibility to work on that product. Office was similar when you saw how these companies like Pfizer were using it to produce the vaccines. So it became our obligation. It was our responsibility to help them go fast and meet that goal. So that was pretty huge. It was just such a big deal to get to see that and play any part in supporting people to help Pfizer on that quest. If I had one takeaway for life, or a way that Microsoft formed my worldview differently, it's that those dimensions of inclusion, it's so much more than just how we think of accessibility, or your culture. Where were you born? Where were you raised? What were your values? But you start to think about dimensions of neurodiversity. How does that change how we see and perceive and interact in the world? You start to think about socioeconomic status. How does that change how we perceive and interact and evolve in the world? So those things, and the chance to work with leading researchers in inclusive design and patterns. Microsoft had a really tremendous impact through the inclusive design toolkit, I think, on putting some language and paradigms around what is inclusion and what does it mean to build your products in a way that they are inclusive of more people. And so we had 3 general principles we always talked about, which is 1, understand who's excluded; 2, design for that singular excluded person, and then extend to everyone. So when you take that in mind and you apply that across all those other dimensions of thinking about diversity, like, there's just incredible power in that. So if that is a thing that we could have put out there, that I think has informed how a lot of products think about inclusion, who is the person that can't use us today? How do we solve their problem? Chances are that's going to solve problems for a lot of people who maybe can't express that they can't use something effectively. And that's big. That's world changing in my mind. There are so many pieces to Microsoft's legacy. One of the biggest things that sticks out to me is, as we're thinking about the evolution of AI and so many individuals, small companies can do so much with the tech that is upon us now and that is going to be emerging. Like our world is going to change quickly. So when you think about that, I think Microsoft's legacy is to bring that and their opportunity to bring that history, that stewardship, that responsibility into how these things evolve. So if you marry what I talked about with the definition of inclusion and thinking about diversity across so many more dimensions than we historically have, if they can marry that with the stewardship and the ethics by which new tech has to evolve so that it's not leaving people behind, so that it's not misunderstood, so it's not doing things they don't understand, that's going to be so important in the evolution of AI ahead of us. So that's what I wish for the company. One other thing is just the importance of design behind everything we do. And even when things don't, the products of the future aren't necessarily going to show up as apps or on two-dimensional screens and surfaces, everything needs good design, and that's good design if it's like I said, the gestures, thinking through the voice interactions, natural language interaction that we have with software and technology, and sort of this person to machine interface. That I think is another incredible opportunity and legacy. Is that these companies need to have design being at a seat at the table. Designers, to me, bring a worldview that is ultimately inclusive of everyone. And that's typically what attracts people to the discipline that is design. And so I wish for the company to keep that. That was a super positive change we went through, and that so many more companies think with that mindset of design has to have that place in leading products for the future. And that's how we'll make great things happen.